War II. Today is January 7th, 2009. What was life like growing up during the Depression?
What was what?
What was life like growing up during the Great Depression?
Depression? During the Depression?
Yes.
Well, during the Depression, life was very good for me because I was a youngster. May not have been that good for older people. We kind of accepted things as the way they were, and we kind of figured that's the way they're supposed to be. We didn't have any of the luxuries we know of today, and we had to watch a buck. We had to be very careful about how we spent money, and I remember my parents had to be very careful about where they lived. We lived in apartment houses most of the time. My father worked 7 days a week, and when I was not going to school in the summertime, I would help him work. He had a children's clothing manufacturing factory, and it was a struggle. But as youngsters, you know, we didn't really feel the impact because we knew of nothing else. That was the only life we knew. It was fun. A lot of good experiences as a child. We made our own fun. We had our own friends, and we didn't have cars, but there was always public transportation. There were subways, streetcars, buses, and we managed to get around quite a bit as youngsters. When I graduated high school, I took a job with a printing company, a lithographic printer in Manhattan, and it kind of eased things for the family because it meant extra income coming in. We had a tough time, but not an impossible time, because I was young, my parents were still relatively young, and we accepted life, just as I keep saying, we accepted life just the way it was, as this is the way things have to be. Of course, I look back at it these days, a lot of the things that we have today were unknown, and had I known back then about television and video and all of that stuff, I might have felt a deficit, but we never missed anything. The war came December 7th, 1941. As President Roosevelt said, the day will live in infamy. And somehow I knew at that point, I was 18 years old at that point, I knew at that point that I was going to be involved with it. The war was going on in Europe at that time. The world was having a lot of problems. We weren't noticing anything at home, but when Pearl Harbor came, I kind of knew, as did all my friends, that this was going to be our war. We talked about enlisting or waiting to be drafted. They brought in a draft. I was too young at the time, but after a year or so, we could see that I was getting close to where I would have to go, and things were kind of bad overseas, and I had the same feeling my friends had about doing our duty. So before they got around to drafting me, I tried to enlist. It was kind of a tough job to enlist. It wasn't that they didn't want me, as I ran into a complication. I'll go into this little sad story aside. You can edit it out later if you don't want. At the time, the best I could do was to join the State Guard, the New York State Guard, because the National Guard had been called up to service for the war. The only thing that replaced it was the State Guard, and I joined the New York State Guard, and I used to attend drills, regular drills. We went away to camp one summer, and what happened is, as things got worse, I said this was not good enough, what I was doing. I really had to get involved. And I had a good friend, and he felt the same way. we talked it over, said, let's go join the Marines. I don't know why I picked the Marines, but he picked the Marines. Didn't set well with my folks. You'll have to forgive me, I'm recovering from a cold. But what happened was, I went down to 299 Broadway. That was the enlisting station. And I started to fill out an application to join the Marines. And one of the questions was, are you now a member of any military organization? Well, foolishly I put down yes. I didn't want to lie. I said I'm a member of the New York State Guard. And when the enlisting officer saw the notation, he said, well, we can't accept you till you get discharged. You've already got a commitment. So I said, okay, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. I went back to my captain in the New York State Guard, and I said, I'm trying to join the Marines, and they won't take me until I get a discharge from here. Well, the captain was angry. He said, no, we're not giving you any discharge because you got to show us that you're already enlisted in the Marines. Well, how do you solve that one? One won't take me because I'm enlisted in another place won't take me until I show that I've already enlisted in another place. Well, anyway, I put things aside. Everything was put aside for about 3 weeks or so. And I went down to 299 Broadway again. And this time on the question, I started all over again. I said, no, I'm not a member of any military organization. And lo and behold, they found me suitable to join the Marines. So, what happened about 3 years later, it was D+4 on Iwo Jima, and we got our first mail. The mail came in, and it was we were in kind of like in a reserve unit at that point. We had taken a rather bad beating the first 3 days. When I opened up my mail, well, it was a postcard. I found a postcard from the New York State Guard threatening to court-martial me because I had been missing the drills. And when I signed up, I agreed that I would abide by all the rules of the New York State Military State Guard. And I showed it to my sergeant. I said, Sergeant, I'm sorry, we were up at the airfield now on Iwo Jima. I had lost more than half of my machine gun squad at the time. And I said, Sergeant, I have to leave here. I got to go to the drills back there. If I don't show up for drills, they're going to court-martial me. And do you know what that sergeant said to me? He said, get back to your foxhole. And that was it. They wouldn't let me go back to the drills for New York State Guard. No. Oh, I'm telling you, it's a sad world. I think I've been talking too much, don't you? All right. Well, I think I've described early childhood. Yes, I attended grade school in the Bronx. I attended high school in Manhattan. I worked for a lithographic printer in Manhattan. I enlisted in the Marines, and that would be about the close of my childhood. I think I enlisted, I was 19, maybe I got out, I was about 22. And what else?
Could you describe your experiences during training? Do you have any great experiences during training?
Well, you want to know about training in the Marine Corps?
Yes.
All right, when you go into Marine Corps, everybody goes to boot camp. Even if they know you're going to be an officer, you're still required to complete, I think the regular schedule was about 8 weeks of boot camp, but in the war they cut it down to about 6 weeks. We were transported by train from New York City and then bus to Parris Island, South Carolina. And it was a rather rough experience. I had signed up, I think December 12th, something like that. I think I signed up for December 12th, but they were not ready to take me right away. They're not ready to call me yet. I had to wait till they can assemble like a class, a large enough group, training group to go down. So I had about maybe 2 weeks in between the time I signed up and the time I was called up. At Paris Island, it was in January now. It was cold, it was bitter, and we lived in barracks. We had maybe about 80 men in the training platoon, and it was rugged because we got up at all kinds of crazy hours. We had one of those famous, or should I say infamous, drill instructors who trained us in having discipline, obeying commands without questioning and just doing what you're told. And
Do you remember this drill instructor's name?
they could make it pretty rough for you, but that was the whole purpose. It was to try and get this whole idea of freedom of expression and doing what you want as civilians. They want you to be disciplined. So even guys who did nothing, they were disciplined. You always got a few raps on your pith helmet from the DI if you didn't like the way you were standing or the way you were walking or something. He always found some reason to give you a slap. And then the whole platoon suffered too. When somebody goofed or screwed up, we would get up like 3 a.m. in the morning and scrub the barracks floor, wood floors with bricks and sand, get everything cleaned up. And I feel sorry for the drill instructor because he had to live with us, and he had to get up those crazy hours. We would assemble outside for roll call, sometimes at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., and it was an all-day grind. There was something doing all day long. Of course, marksmanship was the key thing. They wanted everyone to graduate as a marksman or a sharpshooter, one or the other. And you had to learn first aid. You had to learn how to handle weapons, not just the rifle, which was the main weapon. Everyone was issued a rifle. That was your main weapon. But as in my case, you would have to learn how to handle a machine gun, either a light machine gun or a heavy machine gun. There were mortars, there were BAR men, there were all kinds of infantry weapons. Marine Corps companies are constituted much the same as Army. You have roughly about 200 men in the company, and the company is divided up into platoons and into squads, and everyone has a main specialty, but at the same time everyone was required to know the other specialties. I mean, if you were a machine gunner, you still had to learn how to use a mortar, and you still had to learn how to use a BAR or whatever other weapon that came on, and you had to be able to cover each other's position. So you just didn't learn just one key thing. You concentrated on one thing. I guess it would be like college. You know, you have a major subject, then you've got other subjects besides that. And after about 6 weeks, it snowed, it rained, and we marched and marched and marched, and we did the obstacle courses. They wanted everyone to be fit. We did the obstacle courses a couple of dozen times. We learned judo. We learned how to fight bayonet fighting. We learned everything that the standard infantry company has to know. In Marines, though, you have an extra capacity, an extra skill, learning how to do amphibious landings. We didn't get the amphibious landings in boot camp. That came later on. But in boot camp, I guess it was pretty much what every infantry, Army infantry or otherwise, would have to know. And we kind of knitted together, because as you go along with men that you live and sleep and eat with, you get to know each other pretty well. There were always personality conflicts here and there, but most of the guys got along pretty well. And we came to understand that the DI, the drill instructor, the sergeant, was not quite the monster he first appeared when you came on. He was rough on you, it's true, but you began to understand that there was a reason for his being that way, that his duty was to teach you to respect commands, to respond to them immediately and even do things without questions asked. And when we graduated at the end of 6 weeks, it was a cheerful experience with a DI there. We thanked him, we bought him a present. We knew what he was doing. There was a reason for it. And it just wasn't plain orneriness or meanness that did it. Now, I'm not saying that in some cases, some sergeants, DIs, were deliberately mean, and they were sadists. I heard story about other platoons who had DIs who went deliberately out of their way. And the one thing they were not allowed to do was to go so far as to injure anyone permanently. That they were restricted from doing. And in some cases, that wasn't always observed. There were some injuries, but most of them came through and they were grateful. After you finished boot camp, you were assigned to different units of Marine Corps. The biggest majority, or the majority, was of course assigned as infantrymen. We needed infantrymen in the Pacific. So perhaps out of the 80 men, maybe 70 were assigned to infantry units, not all to the same units, but the different infantry units that were training with different divisions to go overseas. Now, there were about a dozen men or so who, having very high IQs and special skills that became apparent in training, that were recommended for other units. We had a couple of guys that were sent to Air Corps training. Marine Corps has its own Air Corps. You know, we used to fly these F-4 fighters. So a couple of guys went there. A couple of guys went to intelligence, military intelligence. And some of them were deemed to have had enough college and backgrounds, training, where they were sent to officers' training schools. So at the end of the 6 weeks, they weeded out who goes where. But again, most of us were assigned to infantry units. I was assigned to, it was not in existence, I was assigned to a brigade, a loose brigade, which was arranged according to companies, G companies and all. And after I was with them, that was up in North Carolina. Now we were in Camp Lejeune. Camp Lejeune was at North Carolina. See, my memory's beginning to fail me now. Camp Lejeune was a little bit better than Parris Island. You were now released of the strictness of boot camp training. You didn't have to say yes sir every time you spoke to a corporal or an officer. It was a lot more relaxed. But it was very serious because this is the unit you're going to be fighting with. G Company was a good company. I liked it very much. Met a couple of nice guys. We slept in huts, not tents. In boot camp, we slept in barracks. We were 80 men slept to a barrack. When I was assigned to G Company in this brigade, we had like 8-man huts. Had a kerosene heater, used to blow up every once in a while and chase everybody out, but as I say, it was more relaxed. And then somewheres along my second or third month, when I was beginning to settle in, I was beginning to feel comfortable, they initiated the 4th Marine Division. They were going to have a new Marine Corps division for fighting overseas, and there was a big shakeup. Everybody went to different places. I ended up going to F Company. It's in the same battalion. And in F Company is where I spent all of my fighting career. I stayed with F Company from the time it was started till the day it was decommissioned. And you get to know people there too. And you still had friends from G Company too. It was nice. We'd see each other. We would pal around, go on liberties. In F Company, I was assigned to a machine gun squad. I was something like an ammunition carrier. The squads were part of a platoon. And you had the machine gun platoon, you had the mortar platoon, you had the rifleman platoon, you had platoons especially. You had the headquarters. Each company had its own headquarters, and it was under the command of a captain. And I was very fortunate to come in under the command of a very good gentleman, a Captain Padley, who after the war went on to become a major and stayed in the Marine Corps to about 30 years. When he got out, he became a school teacher. I believe he became a principal in one of the schools in California. But Padley was a real gentleman. I say this because of an experience that three of us had in F Company when we knew we were ready to go to the Pacific. We were shipping out of the East Coast from Camp Lejeune to California to a new camp that had just been opened up, Camp Pendleton. We were allowed our first and only liberty that I had in the 3 years of Marine Corps. And we had to make the most of a 3-day liberty. It meant going from North Carolina back up to New York to my folks. I was living with my folks the whole time until I enlisted. And a problem came up. And the problem was that in those days, the railroad companies were very generous to servicemen, and they allowed you to pay half fare on all your trains. I had to take a bus to a railroad, Rocky Mount, had to take a bus up there, and Rocky Mount had a railroad station. I went in to buy my ticket, my half fare ticket. That's about all I had, money I had, was about half fare. I said, when I get up there, my parents would give me some more money as I needed it. And I was informed that the half fare applies only if you buy a round-trip ticket. And I didn't have enough money for a round-trip ticket. And the train schedules were very, very slow. They were few and far between and very crowded. And I knew if I missed that train, I would not have another opportunity to go. I asked they sent me to the Red Cross in the area to see if the Red Cross would finance the other half that I needed. And the Red Cross would do it, but they would have to have some indication from my company that I was there legitimately. I wasn't AWOL. And when they called to get verification, we had a platoon sergeant. That time was a real SOB. Some guy, shall never forget his name, his name is Collinworth. I guess maybe he's not with us anymore, but Sergeant Collinworth refused to have anything to do with it, refused to acknowledge anything. He refused to authorize the Red Cross to give me the money, and he spoke against it. And the Red Cross apologized. They couldn't do anything for me. Well, that was it. It seemed to me I exhausted every possible way of getting the funds I needed to get home up to New York. There was a payphone outside, one of these glass booth payphones, you see. And I was going to call my father and explain to him that I had gotten to the railroad station, but there's no way I could get the money to go home. And I was going to say goodbye, leave him, and I would write him, etc. It's a sad call. And in the middle of my call, there's this guy, Marine, outside. He's banging on the door. He wants to get into that phone. He wants to use that damn phone. And I kept the door shut. I did it for about 2 or 3 minutes, telling my father a sad story. And then I finally said, well, goodbye, Pop. I'll see you when I get home. And as I hung up, I opened the door and I started yelling to him, what the hell's the matter with you? I'm talking to my father, this is the last call. I can't even get this. He says, get him back. He said, you got the money. He said, I got the money for you. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know this guy from Adam. And he says, get him back on the phone. Tell him you're coming up. You have the money. And I did. I told my father, I took the guy's name and address, of course. He said, look, you don't have to pay me back. I said, my father's going to send you cigarettes. They were pretty rare in those days, hard to get, a carton of cigarettes. I says, no, I says, I want, it was about $10, that's all, not much. He said, all I want you to do, he said, I want you to remember this favor, and I want you to pass it on to the next guy. When you see somebody else in trouble, you do the same thing. He's a fighting Marine, a rough, tough guy, but a philosopher. He was a true friend. That's the only time I met him. I never saw him again. My father sent him the money. He sent him the cigarettes, and I never heard from him again. But it was a wonderful thing. I got up there with my 2 other friends, New York guys, on leave, and we spent the 3 days there. We called each other. We decided, you know, this is not enough. We know we're not shipping out that soon. We're going to go AWOL. So I went AWOL. 3 of us went AWOL, and we knew we were going to be in trouble when we get back to the base, because we didn't have that authority, and we knew what the military was like, and AWOL. We figured we were going to be court-martialed, get some jail. But what are they going to do to us? Because we didn't run away, we didn't stay away. We figured it would be something, but we didn't know what. We got back, we were called to Captain Padley's office, the 3 of us, and he gave us a dressing down. Well, you shouldn't do that. You're in the military organization. You have to obey the order. This is the way things are, and you shouldn't have taken it. And okay, what's the punishment? He said, you put us in a tough spot. You know, you guys, we carried you on our books so that you were here those 3 days. Nobody knows that you were AWOL. And I don't want you to ever do that again. So there was another thing. We had some experience which were real tearjerkers, I'll tell you. Captain Padley, he did take a risk. If any of us had gotten in trouble, he would have been at risk too for having put us down as being present. So we shipped out. We left Camp Lejeune. We ended up in sunny California. It was snowy and nasty, just like we have today right up here in Queensbury, in North Carolina in January. It was pretty rough. We ended up in sunny Southern California in Camp Pendleton. We slept in barracks in Camp Pendleton. They were large barracks, but they were very comfortable. They were a very comfortable thing. The trip across going and coming back from California was in troop trains where you slept like 5 men stacked up to the top of the railroad car. And it was a long trip, but we always had food and water and clothing and good cheer. And we got out there. It was really very nice. Camp Pendleton, is still around, of course, was just starting out in those days. They had these new barracks, and as I say, they were more than comfortable. We spent about 10 or 11 months there, where we did a lot of amphibious landings. We practiced on the California coastline. It was ideal for training amphibious landings. We trained with our weapons. We trained with a lot of different units, like the Rangers. The Army Rangers were there too. They helped us get some training with rubber rafts, and also with Higgins boats, and also with Amtraks. There were a vehicle called the Ducks. I still see them riding around some places where they go from land to water. They're wheeled vehicles, giant wheeled vehicles that can drive off a beach into water. And of course the bigger ships that were ocean going, the LSTs, which were one of the main troop carrying ships. We had a lot of training. I believe when the 4th Marine Division left Camp Pendleton, we were probably the best trained division in the Marine Corps for amphibious landings. Now, the war had been going on. The 1st Division was over there. 2nd Division, they had Guadalcanal and a number of islands there, Bougainville, and there was, just before we went out, there was one campaign in an atoll very similar to this one here at Roy Namor, Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall. It was called Tarawa, and they took a big beating there. The 2nd Marine Division had landed on one of these little tiny atolls. This thing is no more than maybe a mile from tip to tip. And the 2nd Marine Division went in with the Higgins boats, which got hung up on the coral. All of these have coral that go way out underwater. You don't see that. But the coral can rip right through boots and everything else. It's sharp, and you have to be very careful about it. They went in with these Higgins boats that got hung up on the coral, and the only way those guys could get out onto shore was to wade into water, waist deep. Sometimes you were waist deep, sometimes you were over your head in water, and you were just sitting ducks for whoever was on land, you know, in their pillboxes and all. So the lesson that they learned from that was, we have to use, when we know we're running into a coral island like this, we have to use another type of vehicle. And the vehicle of choice became the tracked vehicle. They were like tractors, the LTVs, the landing troop vehicles. The tractors had the ability, as treaded vehicles, they could climb up and over the corals. So they bumped around quite a bit, but they managed to get you to shore one way or another. And I was in the, I think at that time it was the 2nd wave. What they do is they don't put everybody ashore helplessly. They line up in waves. When you attack a coastline, you can't have too many people ganging up all at once. So you try to space the landing in lines of vehicles that hit the beach something like maybe 3 minutes apart. Their time, so that the first troops can hit the beach, get in off the beach, get inland away, and the next wave would come in something like 3 minutes behind, and then the 3rd one the same thing. I think we were the 2nd one in that. Anyway, we got into one of these vehicles, these tracked vehicles, and the particular vehicle I had was, I don't know whether you can see this, but there are 2 islands connected by a causeway here, and we were at the left flank. Our whole company was going in to take the middle and the right. We were assigned to the left flank. Well, what happened was, one of the treads on the tractor was not working properly. So as a result, instead of going straight in where we were supposed to land here, we landed up here in the spit of land here. The vehicle landed well away from where our main forces were. And we got in without much trouble at all. That operation was not a very costly one. There were men killed, of course. I'm not saying that there weren't, but the casualties were rather light. But we were separated, and we had to get back on this causeway to where our main body was. We did it, and we completed that operation. We secured the island. It took about 3 days. There was heavy bombardment. The islands are pretty flat to begin with. They're more or less just like little bits of land just breaking up above the ocean. Maybe the highest elevation was about 15 feet. These atolls are not very tall. So there was heavy bombardment, and it was effective. It knocked out most of what was there, and the few resistors that were there, they took their toll, but we got away comparatively easy in Kwajalein. And we completed the operation, and then we were told that our advanced base in the Pacific would be, of all places, Hawaii. the island of Maui. The island of Maui became the 4th Marine Division base for the rest of the stay in the Pacific Ocean. We finished the operation. We went back to Maui, and Maui actually is a beautiful island. There are days when it can rain one second, then you'll have bright sunshine the other, and you'll have spectacular rainbows. It was an island which had an extinct volcano, although you'd get smoke coming out of it. Now, Haleakala was the highest point on Maui. The island was shaped something like a dumbbell. It had one section of the dumbbell was pretty big, and you had the volcano, Haleakala, and the other section of the dumbbell was smaller, but it was jungle-like. It was mountainous. There was the main income on the island came from pineapples. Dole pineapples had fields and fields of pineapples, which we enjoyed for a while till we had our fill. And we trained for the next operation. I think it was February 14th, 43, 44. I'm just trying to get things straight. Yeah, we were training for our next operation would be to go to the Marianas Island. And that would be a double operation. We had to take the island of Saipan and then take the island of Tinian. And we went out, it was June 15th. We always went to Pearl Harbor to load up with ammunition, get extra men to fill in, and as the battle goes on, you're going to need to resupply troops, material and all. And we traveled in these LSTs. They were large ships which were designed to pull right up onto a beach, and the front of it would open up and a ramp would come down when the door swung open, and you could put tanks in there, and you could keep a couple hundred men aboard. Easily one company of troops could go onto an LST. And we were resupplying in Pearl Harbor at that time. We saw the Arizona, which had been knocked over by the December 7th attack of the Japanese. So the place that we were not, Pearl Harbor is a very complicated layout. They've got all kinds of areas. It's all one port, Pearl Harbor. But it's a pretty big port, and it's pretty complicated. We were loading up, tanking up, something like 7 or 8 LSTs. 7 or 8, maybe even more. We were tied up side by side so that we could bring on board ammunition. And in the middle of a card trick I was showing to some of the guys I had learned, there was a giant explosion on the LST in front of us. It seems either through mishandling or sabotage, I don't know what. I don't think it was sabotage, but I think it was mishandling. There was an accident and everything broke loose. The first thing you know, the LST in front of us was fully involved with flame. Men were jumping overboard. The sailors trying to get away from the docks were tied with these big, thick rope, these hawsers, and they were using machetes and everything to get the boats free. And our boat had to go free too. And we were worried that it would spread, and it did spread. Before we knew it, we lost like 3 LSTs. We lost something like 250 men right in Pearl Harbor. And the story is given in books. Not a word of it ever leaked out to the press. The news press got nothing about it. But everybody on the island of Oahu saw what was happening. And we thought that was going to cause a big delay in going to Saipan, but it didn't. They had enough manpower, and they said, we're not going to delay the operation. The bombing, the explosions would continue all night long. There were giant explosions going on, and it was a very nasty scene because men who had jumped overboard what in some cases were run over by the LSTs in their effort to get away. And, they couldn't do the rescues like they would in a normal sea rescue operation. They just had to get away, otherwise we would lose the whole ship. So it was went on for hours after hours, and I was assigned my first job as a fireman. I was assigned to go down to the hold of the LST that I was on with about 4 other guys, and we took fire hoses. And if we heard anything about our LST being involved with it, we were to hose down tons and tons of ammunition on our LST. And that's in the hold of the ship. You don't see anything above board, you're really down below. And we didn't know for a few hours what was happening. And then finally, when we were relieved, we were told that we had gotten away okay, the ship was okay, but we had lost a number of ships and men. So we sailed on schedule in spite of that. I don't know how they did it, because we figured we lost too much material and men, but we got to Saipan, I think it was June 15, 1944. Yeah, I think it was June 15, 1944. We crossed the international date line. Going and coming, I think there's a rut in the ocean. We went back and forth. Between each operation, we would go back to Maui and then out again. And that meant sailing thousands of miles across the ocean, across the Pacific Ocean, to get from one place to the other. The landings on Saipan were not done with the half-track vehicle, the tracked vehicle. We did use, we did have something like a Higgins boat. And the plan was that we would hit the shore in the waves, the usual for hit the shore in the waves. We would go inland, something like 1,500 feet. We figured with the bombing and everything that they would clear out most of the opposition. Well, the enemy had been on Tinian a long time, and Tinian was not like Kwajalein. Tinian was, I'm sorry, I'm talking about Saipan, I'm getting confused now. But it applies to Tinian too. These were tropical islands, and there was a lot of tropical growth on it, and they were hilly. And there were a lot of caves in them. There was a lot of stuff in them that you couldn't knock out with naval gunfire. And the plan was to proceed into the first ridge, which was about 1,500 feet in, and secure that position. But in doing that, you landed into what was like a coconut grove. You had plenty of trees and everything around you, plenty of vegetation for about the first maybe 200 feet wide section along the beach. But in order to reach the rest of the way to that ridge, you had to cross a wide open barren field. It was hilly, but there was no cover, there was no protection. And you had to get up to that first ridge. And apparently the resistance was so good, they stopped us right in the coconut grove. We got stopped. Some of the guys got through and actually got close to the ridge, but a lot of us got stopped by machine gun fire and sniper fire and everything whatnot, and we couldn't break out of the grove. So it was decided to bring everybody back into the grove and recoup. We would recount our losses, we would reform, and we spent the first night in that grove. The next day, however, we had to move out, and we didn't have the track. We didn't use these tractors because they were sitting ducks in the open field. We decided we would do it on foot, which was better because you were more dispersed. If they hit a tractor, you can kill maybe 15 men in a tractor. So we had the campaign start out with the landings with these amphibious craft, and then all the rest of Saipan, which I think was about 12 miles long. we went up the one side of the flank of
Saipan, we showed us here, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The initial landing forces hit on this side, the south end of the island, and our units were right here, had to cross this open plain. There was an open plain here up to the first ridge, and then we turned left and we would go up north here. And it turned out the maps they had were not too accurate, because this is like a, you know what a washboard is, like a waffle washboard? Well, you had one after the other. You had one valley after another, like a washboard. You had to go up and down these things, and there were a lot of vegetation in there. And the Japanese managed to stake out a number of snipers and all, and they took their toll. They had been on Saipan for many years. It was pretty well fortified. It took us about 3 weeks or so to get up to the north end of the island here. And in that 3 weeks, we suffered casualties, but less and less each day. The worst casualties were suffered by the Army, who was on this side, went up this side of the island, which was in a low section of the island, and the Japanese had reformed and attacked the Army, and it was a nasty battle between so-called Banzai fighters and the Army, and then there were two generals involved, the Marine Corps General Smith and the Army General Smith, where the Marine Corps generals fired the Army General Smith. He felt his men were not aggressive enough. They were able to break through the Army lines and get all the way back to the Marine artillery. Almost Marine artillery would stop them. Artillery is not supposed to be front line troops, but we had the 105 howitzers and all, and the artillery stopped the main counterattack, which occurred here. And then it was just weeks, a couple of weeks of slogging up and down, up and down, up and down these hills. We took some casualties, but not too many. It was just a long drag, and we managed to secure the island in maybe about 4 weeks or so, 3-4 weeks. It was secure. And when we finished it up, they took us on board ship and said, "Okay, fellas, you're not going back to Hawaii. You go into another operation just south of Saipan is the island of Tinian." And Tinian looks kind of like an amoeba. Oh, you had a better map of Saipan. I should have used this one. Tinian was similar to Saipan, maybe a little less growth, a little less hilly, but we did what we pulled a kind of strategic landing there. We landed only a small force, and 4th Marine Division was in that force, and the main landing would seem the most appropriate landing would be down here in Tinian town. There's down here a little spot on the map. Tinian town had the best beaches, and the enemy was expecting us, and they expected us to land on the best beaches. But what they did was they took the worst beaches up here, and they said, "We'll only land very narrow beaches, and we'll only land a small force to start with, and take them by surprise." Well, the ruse worked, because we didn't run into too much resistance immediately as we hit the beach. But within a few hours, they were able to move numbers of troops from Tinian City up here, and by the first morning, they had assembled a pretty good mass, and we managed to get enough troops on shore where we could hold our position, hold the beachhead we had, until we could get more troops come in from other places, to flush it out. And the first night on Tinian was scary, because they had a few tanks there. I hadn't seen any Japanese tanks, not too many Japanese tanks, until we got on Tinian. And they brought up those tanks, they brought up some troops, and all night long. They were firing at us, we were firing at them, and we expected a banzai charge by the morning. But we were pretty well dug. We had our foxholes, we were dug in pretty good, and we heard them yelling to one another. We thought we were going to have hand-to-hand, they were going to come at us. A few did, a few attacked our tank. We were able to get some Sherman tanks ashore too. So a few of the Japanese tried to attack Sherman tanks, but the Sherman tanks were more than a match for them. Sherman tank is not a very heavily armed vehicle, but compared to what the Japanese had, it was a potent vehicle. The Japanese, I think, had tanks that was you wind up with a key and to make them go. Need gasoline. But there were losses. We did take losses, and we managed to break that first morning. There were hundreds of them laying out there that had tried to get at us and couldn't do it. And once that attack failed, the rest of it was pretty easy, going on up to the top, to the northern part. Coming down south, we went south at that point, we were going south. On Saipan, we were going north. On Tinian, we were going south. And we secured the island, and it was somewhat flatter than Saipan, and they were able to build airfields on it. They were able to bring in heavy artillery. We had artillery firing from Saipan into Tinian. We had long reach, the powerful howitzers, 120 millimeter shells. We were able to do some shelling in there. But they built the airfields, and I think you must know the story that sometime later they brought in the Air Force, the Air Corps, and the plane that took off for Hiroshima took off of Tinian. Tinian was the landing field for the Enola Gay. We finished the operation, had a little shrapnel wound, it got a little festered. I ended up back in Maui in a hospital a little bit, but it was really nothing. I was one of the few guys that managed to get away without a Purple Heart, although I could have put in for one, and I didn't want it. What happened? It was a slight wound, and I didn't take care of it. And tropical infections are very rare, very easy to pick up. So we did Tinian. And when that was all secured, we went back to Maui, Camp Maui. And we started a train for, that comes later. We went back to Maui and we started train for the next one, which is also going to be a double operation. The next one is going to be a small island shaped like a pork chop.
It's on the other side. A little bit underneath there.
Where's the pork chop? I don't see a map of the pork chop.
Oh, it is the pork chop. Okay, yeah. A little tiny island, maybe, I don't know, maybe 6-8 miles long from southern tip to the top. We were going to take that in about 3 days, and then we were going to join a much, much larger force and go to Okinawa. We didn't know it at the time. That those plans were not told to us until later on. But we would spend maybe 3 days on this pork chop island. They call it Iwo Jima. And it's in the Bonin Islands. The island was under Japanese control for many, many years. It was under their part of their military strategy to keep that island there. And it was extremely well fortified, extremely well fortified. You can't see the ridges and everything that we had here. Maybe later on you might fill it in with some of the real pictures, very good pictures of what the island was like. But the plan here was really quite simple. We would land with the 2nd Marine Division and units of the 3rd Marine Division, mostly the 4th Marine Division. we would land on these beaches here, these volcanic beaches. The island is sitting right over a hot sulfur bed, and the sand, they call it black. It's pretty much like gray. It's sandy. It's loose sand. You sink knee deep in it. You walk in it, and we went in this time with the half-track vehicles. LVT. It was a different type. Every time we landed, we had a different type of vehicle. Anyway, we lined up, the waves lined up, and I think I was second wave in that too. The first, no, I think I was third wave in that. I remember now. The first wave landed, they went ashore, and apparently very little resistance. They started to move inland, and a few minutes later, the second wave hit. And they started to move inland. And the wave I was in, the third one, we hit behind them, and we started moving inland, and suddenly all hell broke loose. We were sitting there on these open beaches, they're wide expanse. The idea, our unit had to get up to this airfield. We wanted that airfield. Why did we want the airfield? The airfield on Iwo Jima, if you look at the larger map of the Pacific, it was a very strategic location, because bombers that were taken off from Tinian to bomb Japan, which was about 800 miles away, were being wounded and then had no place to go except over that vast span of ocean. 800 miles is a pretty long distance for those old propeller bombers, and a lot of them were ditching at sea. We were losing a lot of wounded bombers at sea. Iwo Jima was in between, right in between. We figured with that, a lot of people can, a lot of planes would have a place to come in for a safe landing without waiting to go back to Tinian, without having to fly all the way down there. So that's why we wanted this airfield, because we needed it to help our wounded bombers. And our unit was part of the group that was supposed to go up to that airfield, take that airfield and secure it and make it safe for the bombers. But we didn't know really truly how well they were fortified. Iwo Jima underwent a naval bombardment for weeks before we landed. Weeks went by. But they had these caves up here, and they were well dug into. They were deep caves. They had all kinds of munitions, and they stored men. They had supplies. They were really well located, so that anyone landing on these beaches was sitting ducks for the fire that came from here and also from Suribachi. At this tip here we have the Mount Suribachi, which the flag went up, and that was like a beehive of machine guns and howitzers, mortars, and whatnot. They also had invented a rocket. The Japanese started using a rocket, which when they launched it, everybody ran, including the Japanese, because nobody knew where those rockets would land. But they were loaded with ammunition. They were powerful bombs, and they could easily produce a shell hole 15, 20 feet wide. The rockets and the mortars, the rockets were not accurate. Their mortars were pretty good. And I went ashore, I had 7 or 8 men. And the table of organization for a machine gun squad calls for 8 men, but many times you didn't have enough manpower. You might have 6 men. Sometimes you even got 5. But I think I landed, let's say with 7 men. And by the end of that first day, I don't want to go into all the blood and everything, but at the end of the first day, I had 3 guys left. And when it was 7, I had lost about half of them. Not killed, but so badly wounded that they couldn't go any further. And we were only about halfway up to the airport. I try to get up as far as I can. Machine gun squad, in an infantry company are in support of the riflemen. The riflemen are supposed to lead the way. The machine gun are supposed to protect them, set up fire, force fire in front of them so any enemy coming, machine guns could take out in front of the riflemen. But we traveled very close to the riflemen. And when it became apparent that we had suffered so many casualties, by the end of the first day, the word came down just to dig in where we were, about halfway up to the landing field. I had 3 men, and I noticed one of them was my #1 gunner. Because sometimes you get like dust particles and everything in the front part. Yeah, okay, we're getting good audio on that. All right. I believe I was saying that at the end of the first day I had 3 men left. One of them, a boy from Pennsylvania, who had an exemption, didn't have to be in the war. He was a family boy, older than me. But he had special exemptions because he had a special trade. He worked in the steel mill, and against his boss's demand, he left the job to join the military. His boss needed him very much. So Tom Clappett came with me, and at the end of the first day, when it started to go down, we were told to dig in, hold our positions, just stay where we are. I noticed he had a bandage on his cheek, and I asked him what happened. He says, nothing. I said, I want to see what's under the bandage. I made him take the bandage off. He had a piece of shrapnel had gone through his cheek. And I said, okay, Tom, you have to leave. You're going back. You can't stay here anymore. He said, he's not going. He's a pretty defiant guy. I said, I'm ordering you back to first aid station. He said, no, I'm not going. I said, we had a little dispute. I said, well, Tom, I don't know what's the matter with you, because he was a defiant. We never really got along fine. We had problems between us. I said, this is in order. You're finished with your fighting. You saw 1 day of combat, and that's it. I said, what the hell's the matter with you? Why don't you go? He said, I can't leave you here with 2 men. There's another thing. I didn't know what to say. I was a kid myself. What was I, 21 years old? So I said, okay, I appreciate that very much. I needed the extra manpower. And he promised to take care of it, to let the corpsmen see it when it was all, when we had a chance to get a corpsman. Corpsmen were in great demand that first day. There were so many injuries, so many bad things that happened. And we lost corpsmen who were trying to help other ones, help other people. But Tom stayed with me, and the next day we tried to get up to that thing. It started again. We had a lot of gunfire, a lot of machine gun fire. We were sitting ducks. You never saw a Japanese. They saw you, but you didn't see them. So we were ordered to just hold positions, and they would bring up reserves and try getting around other ways, which worked. They brought up tanks. That's what finally did it. They brought up tanks, flame-throwing tanks, and they brought up guns that were able to fire directly into these pillboxes. They brought up some heavy stuff and knocked out the fire, and we were able to get up there finally. And because we had lost over half the company, we were put into reserve several days, and the reserves that had taken with us, they took over for a while. And we stayed in reserve maybe about 4 or 5 days. We were in reserve because the problem was replacements and all. Somewheres along the line, I'm trying to think of somewheres along the line, they brought up the mail. I think I told you the story about the postcard from the New York State Guard that said I had to get back for drills. That was up at the airfield then. But they also brought up a copy of Time magazine. Time magazine, it's a news magazine, and it was printed in those days in a special edition, small black and white editions. And it was made for overseas servicemen so they could see what was going on in the world. We didn't know what was going on in the world because we were right at the front line. It's so close to the forest you can't see the trees. All I knew up at the airfield, I was about 2 miles up from where Mount Suribachi was, and somehow I looked at it and I said, I see something flying up there because with a lot of smoke coming out of that mountain. I said, it looks to me like there's something flying up there. And I borrowed a pair of field glasses, and I looked, I said, that's an American flag up there. I said, what the heck is this? I didn't believe they had reached the top yet because of all the activity and what we were going through. But apparently, yes, there was an American flag up there. Well, again, I got this issue of Time magazine, and I don't know exactly what it was at that moment or maybe a couple of weeks later. This campaign took like 5 weeks, and trying to remember exactly the timing. I know I got this issue of Time magazine. I opened it up, and there was a picture there. It looked like a silhouette, just a silhouette of these guys trying to put up like a flag. And I looked at that silhouette and I said, God, that's a wonderful composition. I just looked at the way the men were and I said, I couldn't believe that the guy who got that picture, I said, this picture is a winner. And while we were in relief, we had stationery. We could try to write. And I pulled out a piece of stationery and I started to draw on it. The picture that I saw, I said, I'm going to take this picture. Because I was fairly handy with drawing and a little bit of painting and all. I said, I'm going to try to reproduce this black and white silhouette and make it into a full-size painting. Well, I tried it, really worked at it. I was just laying out a pencil sketch for it. And I put it away, then we'd have more combat. We lost more guys. And it went on and on. It was just a grind. After 5 weeks, my friend Tom and I became pretty good friends. We had solved all our problems. And Tom told me he wants to stay with me for the rest of the time. And I was glad to have him. He was a good Marine. And we kind of patched things up. And he stayed with me till the end of the war, actually. But this drawing that I had made, this pencil drawing, I took back to Maui with me, and I bought some watercolor paper, and I bought some watercolor paints that we got. There was a town nearby, and they had something like an art supply store, and I started to do some stuff with it. And we were in an 8-man tent at that time. I didn't know what to do with this thing. I would work on it a little bit. At night, on the bad lighting and all, I roll it up, put it away, and then we go out. We had to start training for Japan. Oh, Okinawa happens, right? They tell us we're not going to Okinawa. They told we were supposed to go to Okinawa, but then we called us back, and then Okinawa hit. And now we were going to make, my 5th landing would be in Japan. And before you know it, I see this picture started to gain some publicity. I see this picture, hey, this is something else. There was some other artists made things with it, and they used it for war bonds and wall posters and all. That picture that was taken by this guy, Joe Rosenthal, turned out to be something. But the very first picture that was made from 64 years ago is hanging on that wall. That's my souvenir from. I started that picture right in the middle of the battle, and I put it away. I got disgusted with it because I'm not that good an artist, and it stayed hidden for about 60 years until one of my sons, I remember seeing it earlier, saw this picture. I don't know, Clint Eastwood's Flags of Our Fathers. I don't know if you know anything about it. He saw it, and he was telling his guys at work that his father made a picture, did a painting of it. and they asked him to get it out. He took some digital photos, and my other son saw it. He says, you know, we have to put it in a frame. So my other son built a frame for it, and that picture, it stood up, it survived, but it was hidden for about 60 years. The history of the picture is underneath it. You might want to get that later. I don't know if you can get it there. I can give you better shots than that. But yes, we finished the island with a lot of losses. There was a lot of bad stuff. I don't think we want to go into details. I just don't think that it's the point. I think the point here is to remember that when I finished my last campaign, which was Iwo Jima, I went back, I was tired, and I was disgusted, and I knew that I still had another landing to make. And while we're out in the field training exercises for Japan, we got worried that something happened, that a bomb wiped out an entire city of people, and that the bomb may end the war. We couldn't believe it. We had been fighting the Japanese for 3 years, and I felt no one bomb was going to make them turn around and change their mind. They're going to fight to the death. That was the orders given by everyone. Everyone here in the Japanese army was told, you're going to die, but you have to take 10 Marines with you. Before you die, you take 10 Marines with you. So when the word came about Hiroshima, it suddenly began to seem like maybe there was a chance we would not have to do that landing. Captain, we had a new company captain at that time, became a general, General Snowden. He called us together. He said, look, fellas, he said, this is just a rumor. We can't go by it. We know how tough the enemy is. We're going to put all our heart and soul into these training exercises, because as far as we know, we're going to have to land in Japan. It's going to be a brutal, brutal thing. In Japan, it's going to be really bad. 3 days later came Nagasaki. And he called us together again, and he said, well, there is a possibility we may not have to do it. So just for old time's sake, just go through the exercise. That's what we're supposed to do. So we went through training exercises, but I never got to Japan at that time. The war was over. General MacArthur signed the treaty on the Missouri with the Japanese military, and the war ended, and I came back home. At first, I didn't know whether they were going to let me go, because I had signed a contract saying that I would be in the reserves until I was age 35. At that time, I was 23 or 24, no, 22 or 23. Anyway, they told me I'd seen enough and I had to go home with the rest of the guys. So I came home, and that was it. Now, I don't know if you want me to extend as to what happened beyond that point. No? You have enough to go on?
Yeah.
That's just, we talked about action in the war, but I would like to say something a little bit more philosophical about the necessity for war. We had a combat situation in which we knew who the enemy was, and we knew what had to be done to fight them and beat them. And in that way, I think the problem we had at that time was not as great as we have today. Today we have enemies, you don't know who they are. They could be a waiter in a restaurant, they could be the guy at the pump filling up your tank, they could be anyone. The 4th Marine Division had been deactivated for many years until Iraq. It became activated for Iraq. And I just say the necessity of war is very, very unfortunate. And I do feel sorry for the men we have over there today, and I pray for them every night. I hope they'll come home safe and well and all. We're seeing the effects of war, which makes you wonder, will we ever, ever learn? Will we ever, ever learn that this has to stop? If we don't learn, I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you.